Yeah, hi folks. Now in my last video I mentioned that Communist China is now on the move into our backyard. But in reality they've been moving into our backyard for a very long time now through various aid and Belt and Road initiatives, etc. Now even though Kiribati and the Solomon Islands have aligned themselves with Communist China, our leaders down under simply don't care. They look the other way and pretend the threat doesn't exist. Easy money is more important. But first, David Seymour has lost me already.
But let's talk about what you want to do. So the co-governance arrangements that, say for example, the referendum and New Zealanders voted, more than 50%, and so you have a decision to, get rid of co-governance. The ones that are there at the moment, I'm talking Ngaitahu, Waikato Tainui, Whanganui River, Tūhoe, will you reverse those?
Well, no, and that's why what I was saying a moment ago is important, because there are examples of specific settlements, of specific wrongdoings in the past that have been resolved by saying, look, we'll have co-governance over, for example, the Maunga in Auckland. That's okay. You could make the argument that actually those assets should have been returned in full. But what is important is when it comes to the boards of Crown Research Institutes, the boards of state-owned enterprises, the management of Three Waters and healthcare, those were things that did not exist in 1840. So by insisting on co-governance for those, the current government is moving to a whole new paradigm.
And he's right there.
I believe it's inconsistent.
How does co-governance disadvantage Pākehā?
Well, it's not about disadvantaging people. It's about what we want to be as a country. Do we want to be a modern, multi-ethnic, liberal democracy that has equal political rights and opportunity for all? Or do we want to be something a little bit different, an ethno-state where your political rights and your place in the country depends on birth? And I think that latter vision will not just disadvantage Pākehā, it will disadvantage all New Zealanders, because we won't be the kind of positive and inclusive society with a place for all.
Just to be clear, there's a couple of big iwi. Your one in Ngāpuhi, my one in Maniapoto, they're on.
Oh, that's rich. This is really comical. Here we have two Europeans pretending to be Maori.
Settled, going forward, will they have an opportunity to have co-governance models?
Well, it's quite possible that if there was to be a settlement and it was found that a particular piece of land or asset had been wrongly taken and that there should be redress, then one of the arrangements might be co-governance.
No, David, no more co-governance going forward. You've lost me already.
For the moment, we're shifting to the Pacific. China wants to build a military base there. And Beijing is working on a deal with the Solomon Islands. We told you about the story last week. The neighborhood is alarmed. Australia says it is worried. New Zealand is gravely concerned. And frankly, they have reason to be worked up. If China builds a base, the Pacific would be militarized. There is strong backlash against the agreement. And the Solomon Islands is not pleased. In fact, the government has taken offense to these comments. They find this criticism insulting. Prime Minister Manus Island is outraged. This is what he told his parliament.
The security treaty, Mr. Speaker, is pursued at the request of Solomon Islands government. We are not pressured. We are not pressured in any way.
Except getting fat on bribes.
By our new friends. And there is no intention whatsoever, Mr. Speaker, to ask China to build a military base in Solomon Islands. Goodness. We're insulted. We're insulted by such unfounded stories.
We're insulted by such unfounded stories, he says. Sogavare is referring to this document. This is a draft of the proposed deal with China. It was leaked last week. And we told you about it on this show. And going by this draft, there is no ambiguity. It says Chinese ships can make stopovers in the Solomon Islands and Chinese forces can be deployed here. But Sogavare insists that China is not building a base. So has the draft changed? Well, that he won't say. The Prime Minister is not sharing details. All he says at the moment is that the pact is ready to be signed. Same with China. They're bullish on this plan.
Who is sending military planes and warships to the doorstep of other countries all the time, seriously threatening the sovereign security of the countries concerned? Who is building militarized cliques that bring the risk of nuclear proliferation to the Pacific Ocean? And who is creating an atmosphere of tension, provoking bloc confrontation, and casting a shadow on regional peace and stability? The international community can make its own judgment, and the people of the Solomon Islands and the Pacific Island countries can also see it very clearly. No attempt to disrupt or undermine the mutually beneficial cooperation between China and the Pacific Island countries will succeed.
So China is backing the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands. He denies being influenced by Beijing. But his track record tells a very different story. Under his leadership, Chinese influence has grown rapidly in the Solomons. Sogavare came to power in 2019 for a fourth time, and since then his foreign policy has been distinctly pro-China. The Solomon Islands first severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan. A 36-year-long relationship was broken. Then they switched allegiances to China. And it wasn't a smooth switch. China allegedly bribed lawmakers to abandon Taipei. How do we know this? The first claims were made by Taiwan, but soon lawmakers from the Solomons also started speaking out, like Daniel Suidani. He is the premier of Maliata. In 2019, he made a big claim. He said that he was approached by someone from the Chinese government. He was offered cash.
So they rang you and said, we've got $1 million for you if you come to the hotel and accept the switch to China.
Yes.
Daniel Sudani is the premier of the Solomons' largest island, Malata. He says he was offered a $1 million bribe to back his country's switch to China.
You're suggesting that there are a lot of corrupt politicians in your government?
Yes.
He says he refused the money and refused to vote to dump Taiwan. 2 years later, he was made to pay for that decision. Suidani needed funds for a brain surgery. An appeal was made to the Prime Minister Sogavare. The request was turned down, and this lawmaker had to go to Taiwan for treatment. This is what he said later, and I'm quoting. What happened in terms of the switch is not clear, but there is something going on between China and the Solomons that makes them switch without consulting with the people of the nation. Well, he had a point, because the people of the nation were not happy with the switch to China. They showed their anger. In November last year, violent protests broke out. Protesters converged in the capital city. There was violence outside the parliament. Almost the entire Chinatown was destroyed. The protesters even tried to get to the Prime Minister's residence. They failed. So they decided to go after a building that the Prime Minister owns. It was set on fire. The anger against China and the Solomon Islands is obvious. But Sogavare refused to take any lessons from his past. The damages from the violence last year ran into millions of dollars. What will be the price of a security pact with China? Possibly the sovereignty of the Solomon Islands.
And our sovereignty if we don't wake up quickly.
The sensitivities are running high here because Kiribati is critically important to China's Pacific Master Plan. The immense swathe of ocean territory controlled by this tiny island nation is smack in the middle of a secure sea lane China wants to establish, all the way to the Antarctic,
which includes New Zealand,
which it calls the Blue Economic Passage.
So you think this Blue Economic Passage, as China puts it, is just the cover story? It's just the start of what they want to do?
It's the start of a comprehensive plan that they have to dominate the region. And at first it's with economic development, but it will be followed by fishing fleets and maritime law enforcement, and then eventually naval forces.
And of course, ScoMo got caught with his pants down.
Barely 18 months has passed since China's flag was first officially raised in Honiara. Ever since this tiny Pacific nation sensationally switched allegiances from Taipei to Beijing, the pace of Chinese activity has stunned locals.
Me little bit worried. I'm a bit worried because people are talking about this, and I understand that China is a communist country.
My worry is that it will create a clash with countries we already have security ties with before.
A draft security deal which could soon see Chinese forces stationed in Solomon Islands is causing particular concern.
This was in the offing even as far back as last year.
The country's opposition leader claims he warned of a looming Chinese military presence as far back as last August, but was ignored by diplomats.
The Australian government did nothing about it, so I'm extremely disappointed in the Australian government.
Did we drop the ball on this?
Absolutely not, and we've been...
No, of course not. You were protecting Australia by doing this.
Australians want a plan that gets the balance right. And our plan to reach what will be our new official target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050.
And of course, Jacinda got caught with her pants down as well. Wow, just the thought of that makes me cringe.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has urged Solomon's leaders not to look beyond what she calls the Pacific family when considering the country's security.
Really, I'm deeply concerned by the developments that we're hearing and seeing in the Pacific, based on what's being reported around the Solomon Islands. Look, New Zealand has long expressed an opinion that we do not want to see the militarisation of the Pacific, that we believe we can support one another with defence and security needs as they arise.
Yes, she keeps us secure and safe by doing this. Yes, she brings an ISIS bride into New Zealand to keep us secure and safe. And now she's doing this to keep us secure and safe.
8 years after it was first struck with then Prime Minister Julia Gillard finally accepting New Zealand's offer to settle refugees formerly held on Nauru and Manus Island, 150 each year for 3 years, 450 in total.
And of course, in that 450, there will be no terrorists, no violent criminals, and no pedophiles, etc.
We begin tonight with Manus Island. Questions are being raised about New Zealand's refugee vetting process following the release of a report claiming some Manus Island detainees were involved in drug dealing and also involved in sexual activity with underage girls. Now, New Zealand's offer to take 150 Manus Island men is still on the table, and the government has also pledged $3 million towards their care. But details of a report published in today's Australian Financial Review claim some asylum seekers travelled out of the centre to engage children in sexual activity. Now, John Haller has spent the past 4 years working at Manus Island. Prior to that, he worked for 20 years as a prison guard. Mr. Haller said it was well known within the camp that detainees regularly visited a brothel in the nearby town of Lorongau. He told me a bus service was provided for refugees to travel from the detention centre into town every day, and they had money to spend.
The gates were open, they were allowed to wander wherever they liked, except in certain areas where the Navy was, and that was, it's Navy base, so they couldn't go too far around that area itself. But we had buses that run probably 6 trips a day, 6 to 9 trips a day, go in, drop them off, come back, pick them up. That was part of the open centre policy. So these guys could just jump on a bus, go into town. Some of them would go in just for the day, some would go in for weeks. They could just come and go as they pleased. A lot of these guys have parents back at home that will send them money. Money was no object. It was just the gambling tables and everything else that were there. And then there was thousands, literally thousands upon thousands of dollars sitting on tables. Money in there was just, it was Right.
Again, do you have evidence? Did you see and witness any of that stuff?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it happened every night, especially your money on the card tables and everything else like that. There was just thousands of it. You know, you're looking at stacks.
So you were looking, you saw stacks of money on card tables.
Yeah, and they're supposed to be refugees.
Yep. Before the money come out, there was cigarettes. You can stand there and there'd be 50, 60 packets of cigarettes sitting on the table.
Well, John Haller said that while he was there were supposed to be 65 security guards on the ground in the camp at all times. But he says that sometimes there are as few as 25 guards, and it would not be unusual for them to be surrounded by agitated refugees.
They made a lot of threats of violence through the fence and everything else like that, and it wasn't until our actual emergency response group kitted up and actually moved in there that sort of we got that situation under control. But the guys were, belted and thumped and kicked and everything else like that in the process of doing it. We had quite a few incidents of them rushing, like the Sallyport area, which is sort of where our officers' station were and everything else like that. And they'd come out and start on different officers and everything else like that. We had a guy that was just about scalped one night, and three others were beaten and a couple were knocked out trying to assist him.
So what do you mean scalped? I mean, they attacked his head and what
They
happened?
attacked him and hit him over the head with it was a rod anyway of some sort, and it split a big patch of his head, just ripped it clean off. I can't say how many stitches he had or anything else like that. I know he had quite a few, but yeah, it just sort of clean ripped the skin off his head.
Yeah, and here's another guard telling a similar story.
Well, don't do it, is the message from a security guard who worked on Manus Island and is now warning the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern not to take 150 refugees from the detention centre. The New Zealand-born guard says many of the men are violent and that he witnessed and compiled records of up to 8 violent incidents a day while he was working there. Checkpoint has agreed not to reveal his identity. We refer to him as Ian in this interview as he hopes to work again in the security industry in Australia. We have verified through his work identity cards that he did work at detention centres both on Manus Island and Nauru for more than 3 years. Now, Ian claims that there were frequent physical and sexual assaults against staff and against locals, and that he himself was punched in the head. He also says that reports of poor living conditions at Manus while the centre was open, it's closed now, this is while it was open, he claims that they have been exaggerated.
These people had air-conditioned containers, which housed 4, which incidentally were the staff quarters prior to Manus reopening, after the contract changed hands. They had apologies from key stakeholders saying, we're sorry we didn't have the latest iTunes loaded on your computers for you so you can download the latest music. Other things like we have found a better sand quality for your volleyball court. You've got staff over there who are struggling to get Wi-Fi, stay in contact with their loved ones, which was stated would be held accountable in the contract. Yet these people get 3 meals a day, classes, English lessons, exercise, fishing excursions, and yes, as I said, they were incarcerated, but poor treatment, definitely not. By the staff, no. And out of frustration, well, one has to ask, that's all well and good, but why did they leave their families, i.e. women and children, behind and venture to the other side of the world, trying to make a better life for themselves and disregarding their families?
According to media reports, 6 of the men have killed themselves over this time. Why would they do that?
I couldn't honestly tell you that. I mean, yes, I'm aware they have. When I worked in Nauru, they did also. But there's different circumstances. Some people believe there's no hope. Some did it for martyrdom. I can't honestly give you a reason for that, and I'm not going to speculate.
No, fair enough. But you're saying your main point is that their conditions were good.
Yeah, absolutely. The conditions were not that bad. A lot of it's been highlighted by the media after they have taunted the locals. The locals have reared up, and of course they've managed to film it on a camera phone and then send it out saying they fear for their safety. There are numerous refugees who have integrated into the community. One has now married a local woman with 2 children and is quite happy in PNG. It can't be that bad if people are willing to do that.
Okay, well, this comes up now especially because the New Zealand Prime Minister, as the previous government did, is offering to take 150 of these refugees, and it seems like the pressure is mounting on Malcolm Turnbull to perhaps accept that deal. What are your thoughts about the offer?
I think it's a diabolical offer. We have more than 150 homeless people on the streets, low-income families that could do with the help from the government, not these people who have come across the world, dumped all forms of identification in an attempt to hide their criminality. I mean, you've got some 161 offences which have been reported by the Papua New Guinea authorities to the Australian authorities since October. I mean, do we want these kind of people in New Zealand? I most certainly do not. I'm not a racist, I'm not culturally biased, I just do not like the criminal element trying to get a backdoor into a country.
So what would you say to people who said, look, these are genuine refugees, many have fled from war-torn countries, and New Zealand should open its arms and help these people out and give them a fair go? What would you say to them?
I would say to them, straight up, as a member of the general public, would you be happy if a paedophile was released from the prison and became your next-door neighbour?
Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop it there today, folks, and you can watch the rest of those videos in the description below.